They used to laugh when I walked into the gym. A giant body with clumsy feet, a kid too poor to afford proper shoes, stumbling while everyone pointed and whispered. "He'll never make it," they said, mocking every awkward move I made. I felt like a joke, a target, a walking punchline. But what they didn't know was that every insult became fuel, every laugh sharpened my hunger, and one night in front of everyone, I rose above the rim. The moment the glass shattered and the backboard crashed to the floor, everything changed. They called me clumsy, they called me poor. They said I was just a big body that would never fit in, a giant with no grace, a kid destined to stumble through life while others laughed at every misstep. Those words used to echo in my head every night, louder than any cheer, sharper than any whistle. I wasn't just fighting opponents on the court. I was fighting the weight of their laughter, the sting of poverty, and the crushing doubt that maybe they were right about me. But here's the truth I learned through every bruise, every broken shoe, every sleepless night. Being underestimated can become the greatest weapon you'll ever carry, because when the world doubts you, when they push you into the shadows, they forget that shadows can grow into storms. And when that storm finally breaks free, nothing can stop it. This is not just a story about basketball. This is a story about humiliation, hunger, and the moment when pain transforms into power. It's about how a clumsy, poor kid, mocked by everyone, became a giant no one could contain. And along the way, it's about how those laughs turned into silence, how those whispers turned into gasps, and how breaking a single backboard symbolized breaking every chain that had been tied around me. If you've ever been doubted, if you've ever been called names, if you've ever been told you're not enough, this story is for you, because I promise you, the same pain that breaks you can be the fire that builds you. Before we dive into this journey, do me a favor. Subscribe to Beyond the Game, hit that like button, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Which city, which country? I want to know how far this story of struggle and triumph can travel, because together we're not just telling stories. We're building a family of warriors who refuse to stay down. Now, let's go back to where it all began. I can still hear the sound of their laughter, sharp and cruel, bouncing off the cracked walls of the old gym where I first tried to play basketball. Every step I took felt like thunder, too heavy, too awkward, too loud for the fragile wooden floor beneath me. My body had grown faster than my balance, and the other kids never let me forget it. They mimicked my stumbling walk, pointed at the way my shoes bent under my weight, and laughed every time the ball slipped clumsily through my fingers. To them, I wasn't a player. I was a punchline. I was taller than everyone else, towering over them, but instead of respect, it only brought me more ridicule. "Big for nothing," they said. "He's just a clumsy giant." The words cut deeper than any shove or push. I carried those insults home like invisible wounds, and when I lay on the thin mattress in my small, crowded room, the echoes of their voices rang louder than my own heartbeat. Poverty was already heavy enough to carry. Now I was carrying their ridicule too. My mother tried to comfort me. She told me that being different wasn't a curse, that size and struggle could be blessings if I learned how to use them. But to a poor boy mocked at every turn, those words felt like distant promises, impossible to believe. At school, teachers saw me as slow, distracted, out of place. On the court, kids saw me as a joke. At home, I tried to see myself as something more, but the mirror reflected back a boy trapped in a man's body, too clumsy to control his own steps. Still, something inside me refused to quit. Every time they laughed, a spark lit somewhere deep in my chest. It hurt, but it also burned. I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, that fire could become something bigger. I didn't know it yet, but every insult was shaping me, pushing me closer to the moment where I would no longer be the one they laughed at. One night, after another day of mockery, I stood alone in the gym. The lights flickered, the floor creaked, and the silence felt heavier than the noise of laughter. I picked up the ball and held it in my oversized hands. It didn't feel natural yet. It felt foreign, like holding a weight that wasn't mine. But I kept dribbling. I kept moving. Step after clumsy step, bounce after uneven bounce. Sweat dripped, muscles ached, and yet something inside whispered, "Don't stop." That gym became my refuge. While others slept, I practiced. While they mocked me, I worked in silence. At first, the ball slipped away. At first, I tripped more than I scored. But each mistake taught me something. Each fall made me stronger. And in those long hours, away from the laughter, I began to understand what my mother meant. Being different wasn't a curse. It was a weapon waiting to be sharpened. The streets outside were filled with noise, sirens, and shadows of poverty. Friends fell into trouble, some never coming back, but inside that gym, I felt a flicker of hope. The rim above me wasn't just a target. It was a symbol of something higher, something I could reach if I kept pushing. I was still the poor kid. I was still the clumsy giant. But for the first time, I felt like I was carrying something more than ridicule. I was carrying a promise, a silent vow that one day, the same people who laughed at me would watch in silence as I turned their cruelty into power. I didn't know how long it would take. I didn't know how much pain I'd have to endure. But I knew this. Laughter could echo only so long before it broke into silence. And when that sea, the cruelest part of being big, was that everyone expected me to already be strong, coordinated, unstoppable. But inside, I felt like I was living in borrowed skin, trapped in a body I didn't yet understand. My arms were too long, my legs too heavy, my steps too slow. To the kids at school, I wasn't just awkward, I was a circus act. They loved to see me stumble. They waited for it. The moment the ball slipped through my hands, or I missed a layup, the laughter came like thunder, louder than any cheer could ever be. "Hey, big man, try not to break the floor," someone would yell as I ran down the court. Another would shove me from behind just to watch me trip. I wanted to fight back, but I knew if I did, they would say I was just a violent giant, nothing more. So I swallowed the pain. I lowered my head, and I let their words weigh on me like chains. Being poor didn't help. My sneakers were always worn down, the soles peeling away with every step. The others had clean shoes, polished gear, even wristbands that matched their jerseys. I had hand-me-downs and patches stitched by my mother's tired hands. On the playground they mocked me not just for the way I moved, but for the way I looked. Clumsy and broke, they said. A giant going nowhere. There were nights I wanted to give up. Nights I stared at the ceiling of my tiny room and wondered if life had already chosen my path. One of ridicule, of failure, of being the joke people told when they wanted to feel better about themselves. But then, I'd hear my mother's voice. Her words never left me. Being different is not a curse, Shaquille. It's a gift, but you have to decide what to do with it. That voice became my anchor. Every insult turned into a reason to push harder. Every shove turned into fuel for the fire burning deep inside. I realized that if they were going to laugh at me no matter what, I might as well give them something unforgettable to witness. So I began training in silence. I'd arrive at the gym earlier, stay later, even when the lights were dim and the wooden floor groaned under my weight. At first, my body resisted. My lungs burned, my legs trembled, my balance betrayed me. But step by step, hour by hour, something started to change. My hands grew stronger around the ball. My feet learned how to dance across the court. My jumps, once clumsy, began to reach higher. Still, outside that gym, the laughter didn't stop. In fact, it grew louder. They saw me practicing and called it pointless. They said a giant would always be slow, that poverty couldn't be escaped, that no matter how hard I worked, I would always be the same clumsy boy. But inside, I knew something they didn't. I was no longer just practicing skills, I was forging resilience. I was learning how to endure, and one day, all of that endurance would erupt in a single moment that would silence every laugh. I didn't know when, I didn't know where, but I could feel it coming. Every bead of sweat, every bruise, every lonely night in that empty gym was preparing me for something bigger, something no one saw coming. The giant they mocked was still there, yes, but little by little the chains were breaking. The clumsy boy was learning to control his power, and once he did, nothing, not laughter, not poverty, not ridicule, would be able to contain him. Lents came, I'd be the one standing tall in the middle of it. The morning of the school tournament smelled like dust and sweat. I remember tying the laces of my worn-out sneakers, their rubber soles already half detached, and feeling my stomach twist into knots. The shoes squeaked differently from everyone else's polished pairs, announcing my poverty before I even touched the ball. I walked into that crowded gym, and the noise hit me like a wave. Parents clapping, sneakers screeching, voices echoing against the high ceiling. To the crowd, it was just a game. To me, it was survival. I could feel eyes following me. Some kids pointed, already smirking, waiting for their favorite comedy show, the clumsy giant stumbling again. I had grown used to being their entertainment, a giant body with a poor boy's clothes, never fitting in, never moving like the others. As I jogged to warm up, someone shouted, "Don't break the floor, big man!" And laughter erupted across the bleachers. My chest burned, but I kept my head down. The whistle blew, the ball was tossed into the air, and my heart felt like it was trying to jump out of my chest. First possession. The ball bounced my way. I grabbed it too tightly and tripped on my own foot. The sound of laughter exploded through the gym, a storm of mockery. My face flushed, my throat closed, and I wanted to disappear. For 1 second, I believed everything they had ever said about me. But then, I remembered my mother's words, soft yet sharp. Being different is not a curse, Shaquille. It's a gift. You just have to decide how to use it. Her voice cut through the laughter like light through fog. I clenched my jaw, tightened my fists, and told myself, not today, not this game. The next play came fast. My teammate, desperate to get rid of the ball, tossed it in my direction. The ball slammed into my chest, nearly knocking the air out of me. Instinct took over. I held it, turned, and barreled forward. I felt smaller bodies crash against me, but they bounced away like raindrops hitting stone. The rim loomed above, and I jumped, awkward, off balance, but powerful. The ball smashed through the hoop with a force that silenced the gym for a split second. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't graceful, but it was real. The ball dropped through the net, and for the first time, I wasn't the punchline. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult I had ever carried. Heads turned, eyes widened. My teammates looked at me differently, as if they had just realized the clumsy boy might not be so harmless after all. That silence was addictive. I wanted more. On the next play, I fought for a rebound, elbows scraping, lungs burning. I pulled the ball down like it belonged to me and tossed it back up, scoring again. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh or cheer, so they did nothing, just watched. And in that moment, I realized the power of shock, the moment when doubt begins to crack. But I wasn't perfect. I missed shots. I stumbled again. I still looked like a giant learning to walk. The laughter returned in bursts, but weaker this time, more hesitant. Because every mistake I made was followed by another flash of strength, another rebound, another shot, another moment where my size, the thing they mocked, turned into a weapon. By the fourth quarter, sweat poured down my face. My shirt clung to my skin, and my legs felt like lead. But the fire in my chest kept me moving. I blocked a shot so hard it smacked against the wall. I scored again on a messy layup. And when the final buzzer rang, we had won, not because I was brilliant, but because I refused to be the joke they wanted me to be. Walking off the court, I felt the shift. No one clapped for me, not really. Some still smirked, others whispered. But the loud, cruel laughter that had always haunted me, It wasn't there, not this time. And that silence meant everything. On the walk home, my sneakers flapping against the concrete, my shirt soaked in sweat, I replayed every second in my head. I was still poor, I was still clumsy, but for the first time I had cracked the wall of doubt that had been built around me, a wall made of laughter, mockery, and poverty. And if I could make one crack, I knew I could bring the whole thing crashing down. By the time high school began, my body had stretched even taller, and the nickname Clumsy Giant followed me like a shadow. The hallways were filled with voices that seemed louder when they spoke about me. Teachers whispered about how I barely fit into desks. Classmates joked that my shoes were boats, that my arms dragged like tree branches, that my head scraped the ceiling. And yet, none of them saw the hours I spent in silence, perfecting the game they swore I could never play. The first day of tryouts was chaos. The gym echoed with sneakers slamming the floor, whistles shrieking, coaches barking orders. The other players, lean and fast, moved with a rhythm I couldn't match. When I stumbled through the drills, the laughter returned, sharp and familiar. "He's too slow," someone muttered. "He'll never last." Another kid mimicked my awkward steps, arms flailing, and the group erupted in giggles. For a moment, I wanted to walk out, to save myself from another day of humiliation. But I didn't. I thought about those long nights in empty gyms, about the sweat that soaked through my shirt while everyone else slept. I thought about the promise I had made to never let their laughter define me again. And so I stayed. The first scrimmage told a different story. The smaller players danced around me, fast as lightning, but when the ball bounced high off the rim, it belonged to me. My hands swallowed it whole, gripping it with a strength no one else had. I threw it down the court, my arms releasing power like a cannon. When a guard tried to drive past me, I stepped in front of him, and he slammed into me like he had hit a wall. The ball flew loose, and my team scored. For the first time, the laughter died quickly. The room grew quiet, not out of respect, but out of uncertainty. They didn't know what to make of me anymore. Yes, I was still clumsy. Yes, I was still raw, but I was also a force they couldn't ignore. Day after day, the practices carved me into something new. My footwork sharpened, my balance grew steadier, and while others ran out of breath, I pushed through, fueled by years of being underestimated. The coaches began to notice. They called my name more often, shouted my number across the court, corrected my movements with intensity. And each correction, each command, was like oxygen feeding a fire. But not everyone was convinced. Some teammates whispered that I didn't belong, that I was only there because of my size. "He's just big," they said. "Big doesn't mean good. You're doomed." Those words stung, but I had learned to turn sting into fuel. The moment that changed everything came during a packed game against a rival school. The gym was full, voices crashing together like waves. I felt the familiar nerves gnawing at me, the fear of tripping, of giving them another reason to laugh. The first quarter was messy. I fumbled passes, missed a shot, even slipped once. The crowd roared with laughter, the sound wrapping around me like chains. Then came the play. Their guard drove hard into the paint, trying to score an easy layup. I jumped, not gracefully, not beautifully, but powerfully. My hand smacked the ball against the backboard, sending it flying into the stands. The gym froze. Gasps replaced laughter. For one heartbeat, I wasn't clumsy. I was unstoppable. The game shifted after that. I grabbed rebounds like they were mine by right, blocked shots with a force that rattled the rim, scored points through sheer will. By the end, my team had won, and I had proven something, not just to them, but to myself. Walking off the court, I felt the weight of years of ridicule begin to lift. The crowd didn't cheer my name yet, but they didn't laugh either. And for me, that silence was the loudest victory I could imagine. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the cracked ceiling and whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." Word travels fast when something unusual happens on the court. My block in that rival game became the story whispered across town, retold in hallways, repeated in barbershops, carried home in the voices of kids who had once mocked me. They still laughed, of course, but now there was a hesitation in their laughter, a sliver of respect hidden beneath the jokes. For the first time, people weren't just calling me clumsy, they were calling me interesting. The next games drew bigger crowds. Students I didn't know crammed into the bleachers. Parents who had never once glanced my way now leaned forward, curious to see if the stories were true. The air before tip-off felt different, thicker, heavier, alive with expectation. And for me, that expectation was a double-edged sword. I wanted to prove them wrong, but I also feared proving them right. What if it had all been a fluke? What if the giant they whispered about was just another clumsy stumble waiting to happen? When the whistle blew, my chest tightened. My first rebound slipped through my hands, and the crowd chuckled. My heart sank. But then I steadied myself, clenched my jaw, and remembered every lonely night in the empty gym. This wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence. The next possession, I fought through bodies to grab the ball, holding it like a prize. I turned, pushed forward, and scored. The gym buzzed, not with laughter this time, but with murmurs. The whispers grew louder with each play. "Did you see that? He's huge, but he's improving." And then came the dunk. I hadn't planned it. It was instinct. The ball bounced off the rim. I rose, awkward and powerful, and slammed it through with a force that shook the backboard. The sound echoed through the gym, a thunderclap of glass and metal. The crowd erupted, not with ridicule, but with gasps and cheers. In that single moment, I felt the world tilt. The clumsy boy was gone, if only for an instant, and in his place stood a force no one could ignore. After the game, people approached me differently. Coaches patted my back, teammates looked at me with wide eyes, and strangers asked my name. I overheard someone say, "That kid's going places." The same mouths that once called me useless now spoke of potential. And though I still stumbled, though I still wore the same patched-up shoes, I had cracked something far greater than a rim. I had cracked their perception of me. Soon, the whispers reached beyond our school. Rumors of a massive, unstoppable kid spread to nearby towns. Rival teams prepared differently when they heard my name on the roster. Some laughed, thinking it was exaggeration. Others came just to see if the stories were real. The gyms grew louder, the bleachers fuller, and with each game the pressure mounted. But pressure didn't crush me. It forged me. Every time I felt the crowd's eyes burning into my back, I told myself, they're watching because they can't look away. And that became my fuel. I began to notice men in the crowd who weren't parents or students. Men with clipboards, sharp suits and sharp eyes, scouts. They scribbled notes every time I grabbed a rebound or blocked a shot. They whispered to each other when I dunked, pointing, nodding. I didn't know exactly who they were, but I knew enough. They were people who decided futures, people who could change lives. Of course, not everyone wanted me to succeed. Some opponents targeted me, throwing cheap elbows, calling me names, trying to make me lose control. "You're nothing but size," they sneered. "Take away your height, and you're worthless." Those words stung, but they also lit the fire hotter, because I knew one thing they didn't. My height wasn't a curse anymore. It was becoming my weapon. The more they pushed, the harder I played. The more they mocked, the louder the gyms grew with each slam, each block, each rebound. And with every game, I felt something shift inside me. I was no longer just surviving their laughter. I was feeding off it, turning it into fuel, building something unstoppable. Walking home after one of those games, sweat dripping, muscles aching, I saw kids on the street mimicking me, not mocking, but imitating. They raised their arms like me, pretending to dunk, pretending to be me. And in that moment, I realized the whispers had turned into something else entirely. They had turned into belief. The first time it happened, I didn't even believe it myself. The gym was packed tighter than I had ever seen. Bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with sweat and anticipation. By then, the whispers had spread far beyond our town. People came not just to watch a game, but to watch me. Some wanted to see a spectacle, others wanted to see me fail, and a few, they came hoping to witness something they'd talk about for years. The game started rough. Their guards were quick, darting around me, trying to embarrass me with speed. I stumbled more than once, earning chuckles from the crowd. Old wounds reopened, and for a moment it felt like I was back at square one, just the clumsy boy, oversized and out of place. But then the ball found me under the rim. I caught it, spun awkwardly, and jumped. My legs drove upward with a force I hadn't felt before. The ball thundered through the hoop, and then, crack! The rim bent. The backboard shuddered violently, the entire gym gasping as if the roof itself had split. I landed hard, staring up in disbelief. The metal groaned, swaying, almost torn from its bolts. For a second, no one moved. No one breathed. And then, the silence broke into chaos. Screams, shouts, wild laughter, not of mockery, but of shock. I had done it. I had broken what was supposed to be unbreakable. The referees halted the game, scrambling to check the damage. My teammates swarmed me, half terrified, half exhilarated. Opponents shook their heads, some angry, some simply stunned. And the crowd, they roared. Not at my clumsiness, not at my mistakes. They roared because they had seen something that no joke could erase. From that day on, I wasn't just the big kid. I wasn't just poor and clumsy. I was the boy who broke a rim. The story spread like wildfire. Kids bragged that they were there even if they weren't. Parents repeated it in hushed tones. Strangers came up to me on the street pointing, whispering, "That's him. That's the one who shattered the hoop." It became more than a story. It became a legend. But legends come with weight. Every game after, people expected it to happen again. They leaned forward, holding their breath every time I rose toward the rim. Coaches warned me to control my strength, to focus on skill, not destruction. But deep down, I knew breaking that rim was more than an accident. It was a message to every voice that had ever laughed at me. Your laughter can't contain me anymore. And it didn't stop there. Weeks later, in another game, it happened again. A thunderous dunk, a snap of metal. The rim tore free, dangling helplessly as the crowd screamed. I stood there, staring at the destruction, breathing hard, realizing that I had crossed a line few players ever reached. The gym had no choice but to stop the game, people buzzing, some frightened, others ecstatic. My name was no longer just being whispered, it was being shouted. The mocking voices grew fewer. Even those who still laughed did it nervously, as though unsure if the joke was safe anymore. Because now, when they looked at me, they didn't just see clumsiness. They saw raw, unstoppable power. Of course, power draws attention. Newspapers began writing about me. Coaches from bigger schools started calling. Scouts appeared more often, their clipboards full of notes, their eyes wide with calculation. They didn't see a joke. They saw potential, a future. At night, lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling fan creaking above, I thought about those broken rims. To me, they weren't just accidents. They were symbols. Proof that no matter how many times I had been laughed at, no matter how poor or clumsy I had been, there was a strength in me no one could deny. The rims had broken, and with them, so had the chains. Stepping onto the campus of LSU felt like entering another world. The palm trees swayed in the warm Louisiana air. The buildings stretched high, and everywhere I looked, people stared. I wasn't just another tall kid anymore. I was the kid who shattered rims. My reputation had arrived before I did. Professors glanced up from their books when I passed. Students whispered in clusters. Some looked at me with awe, others with doubt, but none of them looked through me anymore. Still, the whispers carried weight. He's big, but is he skilled? Can he keep up with real competition? College ball isn't high school. He'll get exposed. The laughter that once haunted me had changed its form, but the doubt was still there, waiting to suffocate me if I slipped. The first practice was brutal. The gym smelled of polish and sweat, the sound of sneakers on the hardwood echoing like thunder. These weren't the kids from my neighborhood anymore. These were men, strong, fast, disciplined. Their eyes sharpened the second I walked in. To them, I wasn't a teammate yet. I was an intruder who had to prove himself. The drills were faster, harsher, relentless. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, my body begged me to quit. I stumbled, slipped, and for a moment I saw smirks, familiar, cruel, reminding me of the laughter that had always followed me. But I clenched my fists, swallowed the pain, and forced myself to keep moving. And then it happened. A rebound bounced high into the air. I leaped higher than I had in weeks, my hands swallowing the ball. I turned, dropped my shoulder, and slammed it through the rim with such force the entire gym shook. The echo rolled through the walls like an earthquake. My teammates froze. The coaches raised their eyebrows. Silence spread through the court. I had arrived. From that moment, practices changed. Teammates no longer smirked. They challenged me. Every drill became a war, every scrimmage a test. They pushed me harder than anyone had before, and with each shove, each block, each insult, I grew stronger. The clumsy boy was gone. In his place was something raw, unpolished, but undeniably powerful. Games came quickly. The arenas were massive compared to the gyms I grew up in. Bright lights burned down from above, cameras lined the baselines, and thousands of fans screamed with voices that shook the floor. The first time I stepped onto that court, my heart pounded like a drum. But I remembered the silence after my first dunk in high school, the crack of breaking rims, the weight of chains shattering. That memory became my shield. When the whistle blew, instincts took over. I grabbed rebounds like they belonged to me. I blocked shots so hard the crowd gasped, and when I dunked, the arena roared, not with laughter but with awe. It wasn't perfect. I still missed free throws. I still stumbled at times. Critics in the stands shook their heads, writing me off as raw talent without finesse. But they couldn't deny one truth. When I stepped on the court, the game changed. Soon, my name was in headlines. The giant at LSU, unstoppable force, too big to contain. Reporters crowded around me, microphones shoved in my face, cameras flashing. They asked about my size, my strength, my broken backboards. Few asked about the boy who had once been mocked, the poor kid who had carried chains of laughter, but I remembered. I carried those scars with me like armor. With each game, the legend grew. Fans traveled hours just to watch me play. Children wore oversized jerseys with my number, their eyes wide with hope. And every time I saw them, I thought, if only they knew how many nights I cried, how many times I nearly gave up. LSU became the furnace that burned away the last traces of the clumsy boy. Here, under the brightest lights I'd ever seen, I forged myself into a weapon. I wasn't just big anymore, I was unstoppable. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because if college arenas shook when I dunked, what would happen when the world's biggest stage, the NBA, saw me rise above the night of the draft, felt unreal, like I had stepped into someone else's life. Bright lights burned overhead, cameras panned across the room, and names echoed through the speakers. I sat there in a suit that barely fit my massive frame, my knees nearly hitting the table, sweat gathering at the back of my neck. For a boy who had once been mocked for stumbling across a high school gym, this stage felt like standing on the edge of destiny. When my name was called, Orlando Magic selects Shaquille O'Neal, the crowd erupted. My heart pounded as I rose, towering above everyone else, shaking hands with men in suits who looked at me not as a joke, but as an investment, a future, a legend in the making. Flashbulbs blinded me. Reporters shouted questions, microphones swarmed around me. But beneath the noise, I heard only one thing, the silence that had replaced laughter. Arriving in Orlando was a shock. The city buzzed with energy, palm trees swaying under the sun, the arena towering like a cathedral of basketball. Fans lined the streets holding signs, shouting my name, children wearing jerseys already branded with my number. I wasn't just a player anymore. I was a promise of hope, of victory, of power. But promises are heavy to carry. The first practices tested me harder than ever before. These weren't high school kids. These weren't even college rivals. These were grown men, professionals, legends in their own right. They were faster, smarter, stronger than anyone I had faced. They pushed me, shoved me, tried to expose every flaw. "He's just size," some muttered under their breath. "Big doesn't mean unstoppable." The words were familiar, but I had learned how to turn those words into fuel. And then came my first NBA game. The arena was a sea of blue and white, tens of thousands of fans roaring as I stepped onto the court. The ball tipped, the lights blazed, and every eye in the world seemed locked on me. My heart thundered, my hands trembled. But when the ball hit the hardwood, instinct took over. I grabbed rebounds with a ferocity that silenced doubters. I blocked shots that made the crowd gasp. And when I dunked, the entire arena shook. My size, my power, my hunger combined into something the league hadn't seen before. And then it happened. Late in the game, I rose above the rim, ball clutched tight, legs driving with unstoppable force. The dunk exploded through the hoop and the backboard shattered. Glass rained down, sparkling under the arena lights like falling stars. The crowd screamed, players ducked, referees froze. For a moment, the entire NBA stopped to watch the boy once called clumsy tear down what was supposed to be unbreakable. That clip played on every channel. Headlines blazed. Shaquille O'Neal breaks backboard in rookie game. Talk shows argued if I was dangerous or revolutionary. Fans replayed the moment endlessly. Kids wide-eyed, grown men shaking their heads in disbelief. Overnight, I became more than a rookie. I became a spectacle, a force of nature. A reminder that sometimes the same boy they mocked can grow into the man who changes the game forever. But with fame came pressure. Expectations soared. Every city we visited, fans leaned forward, praying to see another rim fall. Every defender tried to stop me, some with elbows, some with words. "You're not skilled enough," they hissed. "You'll never last." But I had been hearing that my whole life. The only difference was now the world was watching me prove them wrong. At night, lying in luxury hotels far from the cracked ceiling of my childhood room, I thought about those days of ridicule. I thought about the laughter that chased me down hallways, the sneakers with soles peeling away, the tears I hid from everyone but my mother. And I realized something powerful. I didn't just play for me anymore. I played for every kid who had ever been mocked, every kid who had ever been called clumsy, poor, or hopeless. Because when I shattered that backboard, it wasn't just glass that fell, it was the weight of every insult I had ever carried. A rim? When I first pulled on the gold and purple jersey of the Los Angeles Lakers, it felt like wearing history. The fabric was heavy, not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. Legends had sweated in these colors, champions had lifted trophies in this arena. And now it was my turn to step into the fire. Los Angeles was nothing like the streets I grew up on. The lights here were brighter, the cameras sharper, the expectations louder. Every night the arena filled with thousands, every seat occupied, every voice ready to either crown me or tear me apart. Outside, Hollywood stars filled courtside seats, their sunglasses glinting under the floodlights, their whispers louder than cheers. I wasn't just playing basketball anymore. I was performing on the biggest stage in the world. At first, the pressure nearly drowned me. Reporters questioned if I could live up to the legends before me. Critics dissected every step I took, every free throw I missed, every word I spoke. "He's dominant," they admitted, "but can he lead? Can he win when it matters most?" Those doubts hung in the air, heavy as chains. But then the wins started coming. Slowly at first, then in waves. Every game felt like a war, and I learned that my size wasn't just an advantage, it was devastation. When I powered into the paint, defenders scattered like leaves in a storm. When I dunked, the arena roared so loudly it felt like the walls themselves shook. And then came the championships. The first title was an eruption. Confetti rained from the rafters, golden against the purple sea of fans, screaming until their voices cracked. I stood on the podium, sweat pouring, arms raised, holding the trophy high. For a moment, I remembered the poor boy mocked in a dim gym, the clumsy giant stumbling while others laughed. Now those same words seemed absurd, drowned beneath the deafening roar of victory. The second title cemented it. The third made me immortal. Los Angeles embraced me, carving my name into the city's beating heart. I became more than a player. I was a king in the kingdom of gold and purple. Children wore my jersey, murals painted my face on brick walls, and the echoes of my dunks rang across playgrounds in every corner of the city. But success never comes without shadows. Fame brought jealousy, criticism, endless eyes dissecting every move. Some still whispered that I was too raw, too reliant on power, too reckless. Others tried to reduce me to size alone, as if strength wasn't also discipline, sacrifice, and unbreakable will. Yet every time I stepped on that court, I silenced them the only way I knew how, with dominance. There were nights I sat alone in my mansion, lights of the city glittering outside like stars scattered across the earth. I thought about how far I had come, from cracked sneakers and laughter in broken gyms to trophies lined up like monuments to survival. But I also felt the weight of what it meant. I wasn't just living my dream. I was carrying the dreams of every kid who had ever been told they were too clumsy, too poor, too hopeless. And when I walked back into the arena, when I saw the banners hanging high, I knew this wasn't just about me. It was about proving that no insult, no doubt, no laughter could stop someone who refused to break. The gold and purple had become my armor, my crown, my kingdom. And in that kingdom, I wasn't the clumsy giant anymore. I was the unstoppable force. Glory is loud, but silence is heavier. I had tasted the roar of victory. I had felt confetti rain down on my shoulders. I had lifted trophies that gleamed under the brightest lights. But once the cheering faded, once the lights dimmed, I was left with something far less glamorous. Weight. The weight of expectation, the weight of perfection, the weight of a crown that everyone admired but few understood. In Los Angeles, success wasn't just demanded, it was consumed. The city loved winners, but love in LA is conditional. The same fans who screamed my name when I shattered rims could turn cold if I missed free throws or limped through injuries. Headlines praised me one day and cut me to pieces the next. Too lazy, too distracted, too big to last. I was no longer the clumsy boy being mocked by classmates. Now I was a champion being dissected by millions. And somehow that cut even deeper. In the locker room, pressure pressed from every corner. Teammates competed for dominance, egos clashed, and even victories sometimes felt like battles instead of celebrations. I was supposed to be the anchor, the unshakable force, the immovable giant who kept everything steady. But when the cameras left and the locker room grew quiet, I sometimes sat with my head in my hands, sweat dripping onto the floor, asking myself, how much longer can I carry this? My body started whispering answers I didn't want to hear. Knees swelling, muscles aching, the toll of years of crashing into defenders and tearing rims apart. I woke up sore, went to bed sorer, and still dragged myself into practice because giants weren't supposed to rest. Giants were supposed to endure. And yet, every night when the crowd roared, something inside me reignited. The moment I stepped onto the court, the fire swallowed the pain. Children waved signs with my name, their voices rising like prayers. I remembered the boy inside me, the poor, clumsy kid who had been told he'd never make it. I played for him. I played for every kid who had been laughed at, for every voice that had ever been silenced. But still, the criticism never stopped. Some reporters said I was more interested in fame than basketball, pointing to my appearances on TV shows, to my jokes, to my music. They didn't understand that laughter was my shield. Humor was how I kept the crushing expectations from breaking me. If I laughed, they couldn't see how much it hurt. If I joked, they couldn't see the nights I went home to ice packs, to sleepless hours staring at the ceiling, wondering if my body could withstand another season. Even in victory, doubt lingered. 3 championships should have been enough to silence critics, but nothing is ever enough when you're standing at the top. Every season began with new questions, new doubts, new storms. Can he do it again? Is this the year he falls? The whispers were louder than any applause. Sometimes I would find myself alone after games, sitting in the empty arena while the janitors swept up confetti. The banners hung high above me, shadows stretching across the court, reminders of what we had achieved. And yet, in the quiet, they felt less like trophies and more like weights hanging over my head. Every banner was a promise to repeat, a burden to carry. I looked at my reflection often, not in mirrors but in the eyes of kids who watched me play. To them, I wasn't just a player, I was hope. I was proof that the poor, clumsy boy inside them could become something unstoppable. And that was the heaviest weight of all, because I didn't want to fail them. The truth is, giants stumble too. And when a giant stumbles, the sound echoes louder than anyone else's. That fear haunted me. What would happen when my strength faltered, when my body broke down, when the laughter I had silenced returned in the form of whispers that I was finished? So, I pushed harder. I played through pain, through criticism, through exhaustion. I carried the crown even when it cut into my shoulders. Because I knew storms are temporary, but legacy is forever. And if my legacy had to be built on broken glass, on shattered rims, on the echoes of laughter turned to silence, then so be it. The weight was heavy, yes, but it was mine to carry. And I would carry it until my body refused to move another step. The body doesn't lie. No matter how much pride you carry, no matter how heavy the crown feels, there comes a day when your knees scream louder than the crowd, when your lungs burn hotter than the lights, when the giant inside you feels caged by his own bones. For me, that day crept in slowly, like cracks in a wall, hardly noticed at first, but impossible to ignore once the pieces began to crumble. I used to rise with ease, leaping high above defenders, shattering rims, shaking arenas. But now, every jump cost me more. Every landing felt like an earthquake tearing through my legs. The fire inside was still there, but my body was no longer its perfect vessel. Trainers wrapped my knees in ice after every game. Teammates patted my back, whispering encouragement. Reporters, though, they saw it differently. He's slowing down. He's not the same. The giant is crumbling. Those words hit harder than any shove under the rim. I'd spent my whole life proving doubters wrong. Every laugh, every insult turned into fuel. But now, the enemy wasn't a crowd of kids or a rival on the court. The enemy was my own body. And how do you fight something you can't escape? I pushed harder, refusing to let go. Nights became endless cycles of painkillers, ice baths, stretching routines that felt more like battles than recovery. I told myself I could still carry the weight, still silence the whispers. And sometimes I did. There were games when the old fire roared back, when I threw down dunks that shook the arena, when fans rose to their feet as if nothing had changed. For a moment, the giant was back, but only for a moment. After the cheers, the silence returned. Alone in hotel rooms, I stared at swollen knees, aching hands, and wondered, is this how legends fade? Not with one fall, but with 1,000 little cracks until nothing is left. The media fed on it. Every missed shot, every game I sat out, every limp down the tunnel became headlines. They didn't see the pain, the work, the fire that still burned. They only saw decline. "He's finished," they said. "His time is over." The same voices that once cheered my name now circled like vultures. But even in the storm, there was light. Children still wore my jersey, still looked up at me with wide eyes. "You're the reason I play," they said. And that meant more than any headline. Because even if my body was breaking, my story was alive. I realized then that legacy isn't built only on dominance, it's built on endurance, on standing tall even when you're falling apart inside, on showing the world that giants bleed too, but they never bow. There were nights I thought about walking away, nights when the pain was unbearable, when the whispers were deafening. But every time I looked back at the boy who was mocked, at the laughter that once chained me, I knew I couldn't stop. Because if I gave up now, every chain I had broken, every rim I had shattered, every silence I had earned would be wasted. So I kept playing, not as the unstoppable force I once was, but as proof that even giants who stumble can still stand. And though the end was coming, though the world was ready to close the chapter, I knew something they didn't. Sometimes the fall of a giant is not an ending. Sometimes it is the beginning of something even greater. When the final whistle of my career blew, I didn't hear it as an ending. I heard it as an echo, a sound that carried through every gym I had ever stepped into, from the broken floors of my childhood to the golden arenas of the NBA. My body was done. My knees had surrendered, my shoulders ached, the fire inside me burned softer. But my story was just beginning. People asked if it was hard to walk away. They didn't understand. I had been fighting gravity my whole life. Not just the pull of the earth, but the pull of doubt, of laughter, of poverty, of pain. Every dunk, every rebound, every shattered rim was a rebellion against that gravity. Retirement wasn't the end of the fight. It was proof that I had already won. I thought back to the first time kids laughed at me for stumbling, calling me clumsy, poor, useless. I thought about the sneakers with peeling soles, about the dim gyms where my mistakes became jokes. And I thought about the silence, the moment when the laughter stopped. That silence had been my greatest victory, louder than any cheer, because it meant I had rewritten the story. And then I looked around me, at the children who wore my jersey, at the murals painted on walls across cities, at the statues built in my image. They didn't see the poor boy, they didn't see the clumsy kid, they saw strength, they saw possibility. They saw proof that even the most unlikely can rise, can dominate, can leave a mark that no one can erase. Legacy, I realized, isn't about how many points you score or how many trophies you hold. Legacy is about what you leave behind in the hearts of others. It's about the spark you light in a kid who feels invisible. It's about the hope you give to someone who has been told you can't. My legacy wasn't just on the court. It was in every person who refused to bow to ridicule, in every child who turned pain into fire. There were nights when I stood in empty arenas long after the lights dimmed, staring at the rim that once mocked me. I remembered breaking it, the glass raining down like stars, the roar that shook the world. And I realized the rim had never been my enemy. My true opponent had always been doubt, the doubt of others and the doubt inside myself. And I had shattered it piece by piece until nothing was left but belief. The boy who was called clumsy became the man who made backboards collapse. The boy who was called poor became the man whose name filled arenas. The boy who was laughed at became the man whose story turned laughter into silence. And that silence is eternal. I still hear the echoes when I walk through the streets, when kids shout my name, when strangers tell me, "You inspired me." Dill, my body may have stopped, but my shadow stretches across generations. Not because I was perfect, not because I never stumbled, but because I showed that stumbling doesn't mean falling, it means learning how to rise. If I could tell that poor, clumsy boy one thing, I'd tell him this. One day, they'll laugh no more. One day, you'll rise above the rim, and when the glass shatters, so will every chain they tried to wrap around you. And now, long after the games are over, I know the truth. Banners fade, records break, trophies collect dust, but the fire you ignite in others, that's the one thing time can't touch. That is legacy. That is immortality. They once called me poor. They once called me clumsy. They once laughed at every stumble, every awkward step, every mistake. But in the end, the same voices that mocked me stood in silence, watching a boy they had written off rise into a giant who could not be ignored. This is not just my story. It's a reminder for you. The chains they wrap around you, the words they throw at you, the doubt they try to bury you under, all of it can become fuel. You can take their laughter and turn it into silence. You can take their doubt and turn it into fire. Remember, the glass that breaks is not the end. It's the beginning of your freedom. If this story touched you, subscribe to Beyond the Game, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your city, your country, let's keep this family growing.